We're going to be having a conversation about the role of American universities in international development. We have some really interesting speakers. Senator Todd Young from Indiana is going to kick it off, and this was really a great idea that Senator Young brought to us. And Senator Young is on his way to becoming the next Senator Lugar, and I think really has been really an important voice for internationalism in the U.S. Senate. He's been a great partner to us here at CSIS. He really represents the state of Indiana quite well. He is very cognizant of representing the state of Indiana, and so whenever he thinks about the world, he also thinks about how it links back to his state of Indiana. So when he came to us, he said, there's this guy named Governor Daniels, and he's the president of Purdue University. I was like, yeah, I've heard of him, and I've heard of Purdue. And he said, he's in town, and we want to have a conversation about the international projection about Purdue University. I said, that's great. I said, this is part of a larger conversation that doesn't get enough attention in Washington about the role of American higher education as a soft power asset for the United States. And I suspect in this audience, I don't have to explain that. I suspect a lot of you kind of live this. But I think and I think we're going to have a chance to unpack this in the conversation. And I said, what I'd like to bring some additional university president voices. And so the president of Marquette was going to be with us, but because of some of the storm stuff that's been going on, he's not going to be able to join us, and I understand that, and we understand that. But I'm very grateful that my friend, president of Babson College, Dr. Carrie Healy, is with us from Boston University, because we wanted to have a couple of different university presidents for this conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Senator Young to come up and kick this off. Senator Young, come on down. Please welcome Senator Young.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much, Dan. I'm grateful for your leadership and for the warm welcome and generous introduction. I want to give my sincere thanks to CSIS for hosting this event, for moderating this event. CSIS, I've really enjoyed partnering with you on a number of initiatives already, whether it was your efforts to help walk point on our development reform task force, or Dan's testimony before my subcommittee on foreign relations. Look forward to continuing to do some good together. I also want to recognize, as Dan did, the two distinguished university presidents that we have here with us today. So President Healy of Babson College and President Daniels of Indiana's fine Purdue University. It's great to be with them. And of course, I want to thank all of you who took the time out of your busy schedules to be here today, and to all of you who happen to be watching through online. So today's topic, the role of American universities in international development. I have to say from the outset that the two presidents you're going to hear from today are the real experts on this topic, and I look forward to learning from them, as I have on some other topics in the past. But as a proud member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and as chairman of the subcommittee on multilateral international development, I certainly welcome this opportunity to offer a bit of my perspective and hopefully to catalyze an informative and constructive conversation. Not surprisingly, here in Washington, D.C., when we discuss international relations and development issues, like so many other issues, there's sometimes a tendency to suffer from a federal government-centric perspective. Overseas, we see significant challenges and all manner of problems that we'd like to solve. We want to help vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. We want to promote economic growth. We want to create trading partners for Americans. Now, we want to do this because it's good and right and consistent with our values, of course, but also because it serves America's economic and national security interests. To address these challenges, we sometimes reflexively start talking about federal government programs and policies. Now, there's no doubt that these federal policies and programs are important. I would call them, many of them, essential. We, of course, must constantly assess the efficacy of these programs, diving deeply into the metrics, and insist that they iteratively improve. that they are always serving the people of the United States of America better. We must end failing programs, something we need to get a whole lot better at here in Washington. So I see this as one of my core responsibilities as a United States Senator, to play these roles. But with that said, if we focus exclusively or even primarily on these federal programs, we risk missing so much of the picture. So the attendees here today and the leaders of the respected academic institutions with us here today know that there are so many important ties between nations that have nothing to do with our federal government. The private sector and our civil society play a vital role, and I believe increasingly will play an even more vital role in relations with other nations and peoples. Civil society can help address and sometimes solve developmental challenges with local, regional, and international implications. American universities are leading on many of these fronts, and let me just dive into how they're making an impact. American universities represent one of our greatest grand strategic assets. Our universities are widely known as the best in the world. And the work of universities in this area, international development, certainly no exception. Now, as the junior senator for the state of Indiana, I'm proud of our many Indiana universities and the role they play in this field. Universities like Purdue have long played a vital role in international development. Purdue has established, for example, a strategic partnership with Colombia. President Daniels will be more familiar with the details, but Purdue's partnership with Colombia goes back some decades. And it's been gaining significant momentum thanks to President Daniels' leadership and the fine team he has assembled. Purdue is working with universities, companies, governmental ministries, NGOs, and other stakeholders in Colombia. They use key analytical tools and data, the best scholarship available, to promote sustainable development by helping Colombia to make evidence-based decisions within government and outside of government. The initiative's good for the Colombian people, of course, and their government, but it also establishes and strengthens valuable ties between our two nations. Moreover, it spurs sustainable economic growth, and it cultivates trading partners for American business. And of course, it creates goodwill for the United States of America. And of course, Purdue is not alone in these efforts. Other universities just in my home state of Indiana, like Notre Dame and Indiana University, and around the country really, are engaged in similar efforts. Now, we confront daunting and seemingly intractable global challenges, and that will always be the case. I would cite, for example, the global food security crisis that I've had an opportunity to work with so many in this room on. And we need all the partners to address issues like this that we can get. Well-designed federal policies and programs are necessary, but not sufficient. Based on that, I'm committed to better understanding the role of American universities in international development, and today's event is an important part of that educational effort. So as I continue to do what I can to optimize federal policies and programs, I want to also do all I can to support and facilitate the impressive, positive, and growing role of our American universities in international development. Thank you again, Dan and CIS, for holding this event today, and thanks so much for allowing me to participate. God bless.
Thanks, Senator. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Okay, please join me up here. Okay.
Oh, well, thank you.
Please. Okay. This is a particular privilege for me. These are two people I really admire and like, and I think are important change agents and leaders in the higher education field. And so I think neither of them really need much of an introduction. President Carrie Healy is the president of Babson College. She had a past life as lieutenant governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And Mitch Daniels is the president of Purdue University, and he had a past life as a governor of Indiana, as well as several other past lives as well. I think this is a really interesting topic that doesn't get enough attention about the international contribution that universities make, and it's sort of overlooked. So I'm really glad that we're able to have this conversation. If I could start with you, President Healy, and talk about how does Babson, talk a little bit, if I said to you, when you think outwards in terms of either your student body or the sorts of contributions that you make at Babson to this conversation, I'd welcome your thoughts about that.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dan, for putting this together. This is a lot of fun, and obviously Mitch is one of my idols, so it's great for me to be here on stage with you. So this is very enjoyable for me on many levels. Babson is a global college, and we have had international students at Babson for decades and decades. This gave me the occasion to look back into our history and say, okay, 30 years ago, how many international students did we have? And 30 years ago, we had percentage-wise about the same amount of international students that you have in Purdue today. And so we at Babson now are all the way up to almost 30% international students coming directly from overseas. And then another 11%, and we just found this out recently, is that we have another 11% of our students who are either dual or triple passport holders. So they reside here in the US, but they have really deep ties to other countries and other cultures. And so when you are on campus, what makes it such a wonderful experience for our students is that they are able to be in class with maybe 20 or more countries represented in a small classroom setting, so that when they're taking in the material around how to be an entrepreneur or how to conduct business globally, we have experts who can say, no, that's not actually how we do it, or this is my experience in my family business, and so forth. So we consider being global, having more than 80 countries represented on campus, having alumni in 114 different countries around the world, essential to who we are and our effectiveness in promoting our mission, which is to create entrepreneurial leaders who generate great economic and social value everywhere. And so even our mission is international, and one of the big challenges for me as the president of Babson has been to figure out how to operationalize that everywhere.
Amazing.
So,
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, President Daniels, how if I said to you, how does the international, if I said international development or international affairs, how does that come across your radar screen as president of Babson College?
Nope.
Sorry, of Purdue.
You tried to promote me.
I know. I was trying to promote you.
it's available.
I'm going to follow that. Looking ahead to today, I was reflecting back 6 years ago now. I was finishing my previous employment and trying to prepare for something brand new. I was obviously going to be very much a rookie.
We may have a technical issue. Is that microphone working, guys?
No.
Okay. I can hear it. Can we give him another one? Make the pain go away, technical team.
It's got the green light on.
Yeah, I know. Does that work?
Well, we'll find out.
All right. Phew.
I was saying, 6 years ago now, preparing for something completely different than I'd done before, this current job, I was visiting and reading the propaganda and so forth of schools of all kinds everywhere. Doesn't matter where it was, big, small, public, private, everybody's global. We're bragging and preening about how global they were, and I was trying to figure out what that really meant. And when I got to Purdue, I said to my new colleagues, in Purdue, like Babson, has a very long history. We've had a significant number of international students there for a century. There's nothing new about that. Mid-teen percentage of our undergraduates right now, and 40+% of our grad students are from somewhere else. So I just thought we had to think a little more carefully about this whole alluring subject. So at the student level, absolutely, and we completely believe with Babson and others that this is a a central part of the modern student experience. We've doubled the number of our students studying abroad over the last 5 years, so all in for that. And likewise, at the level of our individual researchers, we encourage this and support them as they do fascinating things in virtually every country on earth. But institutionally, I thought we had to be very, very careful. And we'd seen that some other institutions had squandered a lot of money and time and energy on things that didn't work out very well. So I've suggested, and we've tried to practice this, that we be selective about our global activities when we act as an institution. And we select for two criteria, basically. One, that we look for things that fit our long suits. And at Purdue University, those include engineering and science and computer science, and certainly agriculture, coming out of our land-grant heritage, things that we are good at across large numbers of our faculty and disciplines. And secondly, that we look for opportunities where we could have an impact at scale. And as interesting as it might be to work in, the Indian subcontinent, who's going to know we were there a few years later? And so
Because it's so big.
So big. So we have found opportunities. The senator mentioned one. We essentially, our people across a variety of disciplines are writing a master plan for the Orinoco region of Colombia. Now that civil war has ended there, this, many people believe, is one of the most promising areas anywhere on earth for future development. So agriculture and infrastructure and education and tourism and all these, we can bring all these, the expertise that we do have in some depth to bear on that. We have a somewhat similar arrangement that's come up more recently in Peru, in the Arequipa region, once again to help them in a comprehensive way plan and execute improvements for their long-term future. And we have some reason to hope that if we do these things well and there is implementation, that in years to come people will look back and say it mattered that Purdue was here. So those are, I'll have other illustrations maybe for later, but I guess lastly to say that absolutely trying to prepare, educate, and send home as friends of America.
Amen.
Talented young people has always been something that we value. Next week, very pertinent to this conference, there's a big meeting on our campus called Scale Up, where people from all over the world will talk about how to take progress related to food security to genuinely larger scales. Our top guest is a Purdue grad, the current holder of the World Food Prize, Akin Adesina, now the head of the African Development Bank. Perfect example, Dan, of what you were talking about in terms of what American universities can do at the individual level.
So just on the case of Colombia, I was in Colombia in March, and we're on the verge of getting peace in our time in Colombia, and if you could get some things right, there's a ton of tourism to be had there. There's more hardwood potential. It's the size of Great Britain, the amount of hardwood potential just in the country of Colombia. You could have a mini Brazil in terms of agricultural productivity. So all these are sorts of things I suspect you all could contribute to as Purdue, and all the kind of know-how that you have. There's a little bit of an interesting story about how you guys, can I describe it? Did you stumble into the Columbia thing? How's that a way to describe it? How did the Columbia thing happen? Maybe stumble's not the right word, but it sounded, when I was on the phone with your folks, it sounded like you stumbled. It was a really interesting way. Someone stumbled into it, and it was a really interesting story. I thought it was an interesting anecdote.
Well, we do a lot of stumbling. And then I guess there's a little bit. What I guess I would say is there had been, for quite some time, a lot of our people coming and going from Columbia. There were some individual faculty members and researchers, and a lot of people had a lot of encounters. Nothing much had happened. And I remember asking, this is all very interesting. When are we going to do something meaningful? And it was only about 3 or 4 years ago that we got organized. A couple of Purdue graduates who had gone back to their country and had very successful, in this case, business careers, played instrumental roles.
That's it.
Got us together ultimately with the government. I went down to see then President Santos, and Yeah, I guess this is a good example of how we wanted to go from being dilettantes to doing something at scale that might have long-term impact. And it did involve some of our alums, and I think, again, it involved some of our people going down there with a very different mentality, which is we either want to go big or go home.
So President Haley, talk about, you've gotten some asks from other governments to say what you're doing at Babson about training future generations of business leaders is globally known, and we would like to. How do we get that in our country? I think you've gotten phone calls like that.
Right.
Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that.
Yes, and I'd like to add on a little bit to what you're saying about the choices that you have to make as a college or university about what your bandwidth is, your faculty's bandwidth, and how exactly you want to engage. I think that faculties are accustomed to engaging in terms of international research. So it's pretty easy to say, please connect with your fellow researchers around the world.
Yep.
And do a project on entrepreneurship. So we're one of the founders and have been engaged in the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor program in about 70 countries around the world for a number of years now. And a lot of countries really find that very helpful because it allows them to benchmark themselves against other people in the region or between continents, and to try to figure out what kind of attitudes their citizens might hold, and if their policies are having any impact. Are there more entrepreneurs than there used to be, and are attitudes changing around failure and things like that. So those are pretty easy sells. Those kinds of collaborative processes around traditional academic activities. But something like what you're doing in Colombia, and we also have an on-the-ground intensive program in Caldas and Manizales, where we are trying to start an entire entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we've been there for 6 years now, working with the government and the universities and so forth in Manizales to build that in Colombia. That's a different kind of commitment. And I think when governments, to get back to your question, when governments come to you and say, help us, use your knowledge, you can either say, we're going to help you create institutions like ours, academic institutions, or we can apply our academic know-how in a very hands-on way. And that's unusual for colleges. That sort of takes a lot of people out of their comfort zone, because they really view that as something more that development workers or or governments or other people ought to be doing. And some people actually will question, is it appropriate for a college to be engaging in this way in hands-on work? I would argue yes, and that we should not only do it, but we should study it. And that's how we can become more and more relevant, is if we actually study what we do and apply our ideas and test them out.
Can I just
Yes, please.
say that it takes a special sort of leadership at a place like Babson, which we've all admired for so long, but a little less so in our case, because as a land-grant school, engagement's always been part of our assignment. We do it really well some days and not on all days, but I think what you just said is so important, and it takes special advocacy and evangelism by a leader like you to get that across. A little less so in our case, where this has been our assignment for 150 years. It once meant teach an Indiana farmer about the latest plow. Now it may be helping women farmers in Africa store and save all their crop, and not just the quarter of it that historically survived to get to somebody's table. But absolutely crossing the barrier from pure research to something that is hands-on and that does leave a mark is where I hope more and more schools will go.
And if I could just,
Please.
again, jump in there, because the word that you used is the critical word in this discussion, which is engagement. And colleges and universities have to decide if they will engage, and whether engagement to educate is always an unmitigated good, because the biggest objections you're going to get to international involvement in academia involve engagement in countries where perhaps there isn't a good record for democracy or human rights or any other sort of abuse. Perhaps they're engaged in a war. Perhaps they're emerging, from a conflict situation and things are still a bit murky. And you'll find often that in academia, even though you could have great impact in those environments, many are reticent to engage when it's not clear that their consciences will be comforted.
So this is actually a really important point. My hope, and I think many Washington policymakers should want, that when folks come and study in the U.S. after they return, that their first phone call, whether it's academic research or scientific research or a business partnership or a security partnership or a diplomatic partnership, that their first phone call is the United States of America. I'd much rather they study in the US and then their first phone call be the United States, as opposed to have them study in China and have their first phone call be calling China. So I do think this is something that whenever I travel overseas, I ask the leadership in a country, where do you send your students, where do you send your elite students to study? And so it depends on where, and increasingly what I hear is, we have been sending a lot to the US. Sometimes we're getting pushback on getting student visas, and I want to talk about student visas and other education visas in a second. And the Chinese are offering a lot more scholarships, and so we're doing a lot more of that. So I'm not necessarily sure either of you have something to say about China as a strategic competitor, but I do think we have to look at education in the sense that there are other options. People can study all over the world. The other thing is, to the extent that students feel welcome, they'll come here. I think there's been some students who've said, I don't know if I want to come because I'm a certain ethnicity, or I'm from a certain place, and do I really want to put up with the headache? Am I going to feel welcome here? And so I think there's been some of that. Overall, if you look at the overall number of students studying in the U.S., it's something like 1.3 or 1.2 million foreign students in the U.S. So it's grown since 9/11, but there've been some changes in some of the numbers. So I'd welcome any reflections on any of that that either of you have.
Yeah. I'm happy to start. We have doubled the number of international applicants to Babson over the course of the last 5 years. And we went out of our way last year when there was a lot of anxiety internationally.
Why would that be?
Just
kidding.
About whether or not they would be able to receive their visas in a similar way as they have in the past. So we found that it really made a lot of difference to be able to have webinars and so forth, and to send representatives out to say that we are welcoming to international students. And we were fortunate to have the Forbes #1 ranking for international students. So we were able to promote that and say that we are a welcoming environment, and talk about all the ways that we welcome students into that environment. But at the same time, what I saw that was fascinating is that there was a drop-off last year in applicants who needed financial aid internationally. So I had introduced 5 years ago a global scholars program, because I wanted to attract the most well-qualified, the most entrepreneurial, game-changing individuals we could find internationally. And at that time, we had no financial aid for international students. And so that actually generated the boom in applications that we saw from international students. But we saw the biggest drop-off, not from our wealthy, full tuition-paying students and applicants. They came and they felt comfortable and confident that they would be able to receive their visas. It was really those that had financial need that were most intimidated by the idea that perhaps this would not be as friendly an environment as it had been in the past.
Okay, President Daniels?
Our situation, I guess, is a little different. First of all, as a state school, we offer essentially no financial aid to international students.
But there are
focus it-
private scholarships or outside scholarships they can access.
There are some, but our aid is concentrated increasingly on a need basis and
Yeah.
domestic students. Now again, we've had a very international population for a very long time. There was a year just about the time I arrived in which I think we had more Chinese students in absolute numbers than anybody in the country. We've always been in the top 3, 4, 5 in terms of international numbers and even on a percentage basis. We have actually been dialing that down the last few years. And so we're still very international, but in our entering class this year, 9% were international, down from a high of almost 20 in one class back a few years. And I could go into the reasons for that if anyone's interested, but just to say that we have, we still have a very diverse campus in this respect. But the other thing we've really worked on is to broaden and diversify within the international population, which was 70+% from 3 countries when I got there. And now only, not more than a third, and it is Chinese, are from any one country in the, among the close to 1,000 that we just enrolled. I should say we have our biggest freshman class ever. These numbers are still very big, even though the mix and the percentage we have moderated a little bit.
Could each of you talk about some of the graduates who've studied at Babson or Purdue who either from, say, Africa or Latin America? Tell a story of somebody who studied and have gone on to make good. Could you tell me a couple stories like that? Because I think that really matters. One of the things, there was a study done in 2010 at the Center for Global Development looking at that there are a series of African countries that are going to become middle-income countries, successful countries. And Steve Radelet, who's at Georgetown, came up with sort of 5 reasons as to why. I won't enumerate all 5. But one of them fascinated me, and one of the reasons was that there had been a cadre of technocrats who'd been educated in places like the United States, the UK, or France, who'd gone back as central bankers or finance ministers and had implemented a series of sort of not crazy economic policies that they'd picked up in economic programs in places like the United States, and said that it had gone back and moved up the system and gone and implemented it. So I actually think this stuff really matters in the sense of the kinds of things that are, whether it could be in the sphere of health, it can be in the sphere of agriculture, it can be in the sphere of economic policy, certainly also in private business in terms of the kinds of business. So I'd welcome some examples of students that have studied at your schools and then have gone on to make good, if I can put it that way, have been made a big impact in their societies.
Mm-hmm.
I could keep you all afternoon because, again, we go back a long way. I mentioned fresh example, Dr. Adesina, who was the ag minister and
Nigeria.
Cleaned up he cleaned up corruption and all sorts of problems there, and was eventually elevated to head of the African Development Bank.
He's a total star. He's a total superstar.
All of our alumni.
Of course, of course.
Just one story at random. On my first visit to Taiwan, after taking this job, one of the events that was organized was some of our it was sort of a council of elders who probably a dozen or 15 people who had been active in alumni affairs there the longest. We're sitting around, typically oval table and Lazy Susan style, and the parent chair of the group said, maybe we should all introduce ourselves. And in the next 10 minutes, I heard almost the entire construction of Taiwan described. One fellow said, I built all the ports. I built all the next guy. I built all the railroads. I built the highway from Taipei to, somewhere. The water system. Now, I've always been a strong engineering school. A lot of the reason we've always had a lot of international students, many of them came for disciplines like that, but it was astonishing. By the time they had gotten around the table, I felt as though, that any non-Boilermaker build anything in this country. But it's an inspiring thing, actually, when you see what a great university, ours or any of the, as you say, the finest network in the world, can do and can contribute just at the level of individual human talent.
And to both of your points, I think Taiwan is one of the best examples. I haven't been there since the inauguration of President Ma, but at that time, literally, I think every person in his cabinet and the head of the Supreme Court all had ties to U.S. universities. And again, their introductions were all, I studied here in the U.S., I studied there in the U.S., and I think I met some of your alums that day who were building everything. And so, yes, I think it's important for us not to underestimate how critical it is to be welcoming to these students. We have no idea how those investments are going to pay off for us in terms of goodwill toward the United States in the long run. In terms of our own students, one of the global scholars, who was one of the first people to benefit from the financial aid program that we established for outstanding international students, was a man called Marvin Tarwali, who came to us from Liberia. And he caught my attention initially because he had been trying to unionize students in Liberia in order to demand textbooks. And I thought that seemed like the kind of person we wanted to have on campus. And so he graduated last year and went back and has started a program that is training entrepreneurs, training young people to go on and get scholarships in the US and elsewhere, because he valued his experience studying in the US so much. He's working with female entrepreneurs, and he's teaching young people to code and so forth. And I hope that Liberia was on that list of countries that are likely to really break away and
make it.
And really make it, because, and I'd like to think that we would have had some part in that by really supporting and mentoring Marvin during the time that he was here. He had host families in our community. He recently came back to give us all an update on what he was doing, and we convened everybody at the president's house to hear what he was up to. And we're deeply proud of him, but he's one of 40 students we're incubating like that as world changers right now. And then, of course, all the other international students who are probably going to be very motivated to do the same. So we're excited about the impact that we can have. We also focus on social impact and social entrepreneurs in general. And so one of our really exciting recent graduates from our graduate program, Savitha, she's started a company called Aurora, and it is in India, and she is literally making it her mission to end energy poverty and to do off-grid solar with as many individuals and villages as possible. She's literally going village to village, trying to start a for-profit company, which is employing women to sell these off-grid solar products. And so it's exciting to be with these young people and to see what they're doing.
It's amazing. Could each of you talk about do you have any issues with either getting student visas or having folks being able to come to the States? Does that come across your radar screen, either of you?
Rarely. We don't have trouble getting them here. What I don't like is sending them home too often. I'm one of those who would put a green card in everybody's diploma if they let me, because as important and motivating as it is when people go home and do important work and build their lives there, I confess to a little bit of regret when talent, much of whom would like to stay here in the United States, is not able to do so. And I think it's very short-sighted, but
they get a 1-year work permit and then they have to go.
Too often.
Too often, right?
Yeah.
So President Healy, does this come across your radar screen?
I mean, it does. We invest very deeply in some of the best, most skilled people to help guide our incoming students and our returning students through that visa process. And so we rarely have anyone not be able to arrive as a result. But it's not easy. And it's an ongoing issue for us to make sure that all of that works. I agree with the governor that the right policy from my standpoint especially in programs that deal with technology, we should be stapling that green card right on that diploma and offering them, extended stays for the rest of their life. And I feel the same way about entrepreneurs. So we started something called the Global Entrepreneur in Residence program a couple years ago to try to help some of our students and students from other universities who want to be entrepreneurs stay in the country longer. And we were trying to help them navigate the visa process to stay, and actually found their companies here. Some of them have created hundreds of jobs, and you just want to say, why wouldn't we want that person here in this country?
Okay, good. I want to open it up to some questions. I know I suspect there's a lot of folks with views, so let me start with the person with the Star Trek out thing on it. What is
you've
that
been
thing?
frightening me the entire time. Please.
Google classes, where was
I'm-
we put this on a new service on blockchain.
Okay.
Developed by one of Purdue University.
Okay.
Okay. Were you looking me up during the course of this? What were you doing on that in your
It's
glasses?
like Terminator.
It's a real video camera that can go live 5G.
It's now on blockchain, developed by
So
one of
name, rank, and serial number. Who are you?
Peter Semler, founder and chief executive editor of Capital Intelligence. My question is to Governor Perdue. Tunisia is a dynamic, developed country. They want Purdue Global to look at acquiring a engineering MBA school called Espere, which is indirectly owned and funded by a private equity fund funded by OPEC. And this would be a great Kaplan, private sector.
Okay.
And I was
So
wondering.
Tunisia, the school, right?
Yeah, M&A by Purdue
Okay.
Global. Thank you.
We're going to do this in bunches. We're going to get several comments here. My friend here in the second row.
We'll talk right after.
And then my friend Dennis.
Sounds like an opportunity.
Get three of them.
Thank you.
Okay.
Glad to be your friend. I'm Mindy Reiser. I worked for the Senior Fulbright Scholars Program for a number of years. It's run by CIES for the State Department. My question to you now is about faculty, international faculty who were born in country X, do their doctorates here, and stay. What role do they play? Do they become mentors to students from their countries? Do they infuse your broader faculty with some new perspectives? They're an important resource too, so say a few words about that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I want to hear
Happy
from
talk
my
about
friend
that.
Dennis DeTrey. Dennis is a former senior World Bank official and then had a second life working supporting the U.S. military. And you're
now a
going to have an
third life.
affiliation with us very shortly.
Right. I currently am in my 9th year of creating an English language university in Kazakhstan
Great.
that's based on the American model. So many of the issues you raise resonate. And I want to tell you just a quick story. When I got started with this, I spoke to the embassy, I spoke to my State Department friends, and I said, this is a no-brainer. The door is wide open. And by the way, if you don't go through it, somebody else will. And that somebody else is
Next door.
Is next door.
Yeah.
And they're doing it. The Asian Universities Alliance is a Chinese mechanism to base, it's part of a global strategy. If you go to Singapore, the government has an explicit strategy to use universities to make friends in other countries. They have strategic countries. They use fellowships to bring those people in. We should be doing the same things, folk. It's not expensive stuff, and it's an incredible investment in the future. But let me come back to a point that was made earlier, and that is that it can be difficult to get people to come to less than nice countries, okay? I've worked most of my career in autocratic countries. I spent 5 years in Indonesia, and have now spent close to 17 years in Kazakhstan. Those are precisely the countries we need to be in. If you want to change those countries, you need to start with the youth. And when countries are prepared to open their doors to US-style English language universities, we should be all over it, folks. And we have 55 different nationalities on our faculty.
This is the Kazakh University.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can, and they're all good, we have a very strict policy, both for letting students in. Our big challenge is to internationalize our student body, because that's what we want. We want to give the young Kazakhstanis an international experience, okay? And we can't do them if we're 99% or 95%, I guess it is now.
Kazakh.
Kazakh. or Kazakhstani. So anybody that's interested in helping me find people that would like to come, we have a great engineering school.
It's in Astana.
It's in Astana.
Which is a very nice, it's actually quite a nice city, and Kazakhstan is a really nice, it's actually quite a nice country, and you should
very
actually check
safe.
it out.
By the way, bring a warm coat in the winter.
Yes.
That's all I tell
That's the
you.
only, there's a one downside, which
Yeah.
is it's kind of cold in the winter.
Kind of is like minus 40.
Yeah,
folks,
minus
so
40. But
not
what
good.
they, but thanks, Dennis. So,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm done. I just wanted to make the point that as a global strategy for the United States, it's always been supported, Nazarbayev University, but never in the dynamic way that I thought we should as a country.
And they don't need money. They
No,
don't
no,
need
no,
money.
no.
They got plenty of money.
Yeah.
They don't need that. They need a little bit of know-how, or they need some students, or they need some partnership with other universities. They got plenty of dough. It's
I
not
mean,
a
this
question
would have
of
been a
money.
win-win situation for everybody
Yeah.
if we'd been just a little more aggressive on it in terms of our relationship using the university. I mean, yes, it's an autocratic country, it's not democratic, etc. But who's going to beat up on people that support an English language university that is open, that, by the way, has a perfect gender balance, 50-50 men and women,
Okay.
okay?
So if I could,
Yeah,
first
please.
of all, Dennis, thank you so much for bringing that up. That was exactly the point that
you were
I
making.
was making earlier. You're exactly correct. This is the concern that people often have. Babson, over the course of the last 5 years, has been engaged in working with Lockheed Martin and Imar and the government of Saudi Arabia to found a college, the Prince Mohammed bin Salman College for Business and Entrepreneurship in a place called the King Abdullah Economic City outside of Jeddah. And I think that this is such a critically important mission for us to bring entrepreneurship and exposure to American ideas about business and entrepreneurship to Saudi Arabia and to the youth in Saudi Arabia. Our class is 50% women. This year, which is fantastic, and we just welcomed our second class there. Now, I think that what you're doing is incredibly hard, right? You know, starting a new college or university anywhere is incredibly hard.
really hard.
And so I don't want to underestimate that. And so when people come to us and say, could you help us start
Can we
a new,
copy paste?
you know,
Can we copy
could we
paste
start a new
Babson?
university? I go, you know, blanched, you know, because it's such a difficult project. But that has nothing to do with doing it in another country necessarily. It just is a hard thing to do, period. And I'm also on the board of trustees of the American University of Afghanistan, and I would love to see the Senate and the House step up and support that effort, because I think that our most lasting and important contribution may be an educated youth in Afghanistan through an institution like the American University of Afghanistan, and currently it really doesn't receive any sort of dependable support.
So I was lucky enough to get an invite to your table one year when you bought a table. And I was profoundly moved. I'm rarely moved by, because I'm in the business, but I was really moved. The American University of Afghanistan, oh my word, I mean, that is just unbelievable. That is just super, that is really incredible. The stories are unbelievable, and it's really important. Let me just, Carrie, could I just, if I might, just, we were talking earlier about leadership and having to like step up if you want to do, you were just describing that example in Jeddah. You had to go to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I go often.
So
I go often. It's great. I have no problem with it whatsoever. Nor does the members of our faculty who travel there.
Do you wear an
very
abaya?
welcomed. Yes, of course I do.
Okay.
Yeah, and because it's the law of the country and it's polite. And so whenever I go anywhere in the world, if there, you know, I will try my best not to offend people, and I'll try to abide by the laws of the country. So I have no problem with that at all.
So I just want to say thank you for doing that, because I think it's important that you have to show up, and you have to be a leader, and I think it's important because I think having a school like that is really important in a place like Saudi
Well, I
Arabia.
wish you could have met the incoming students. They were the most well-qualified, extraordinary MBA students I've ever met. There were women there who already had medical doctorates or who were working in the pharmaceutical industry, and they also wanted to learn how to get their MBAs so they could start hospitals and do other things. We're going to be seeing a lot of really interesting things coming out of that. I also wanted to make sure that I responded to your question. I think it's critically important that we have international faculty. One of the, I would say, the best parts at Babson is that we do have good international faculty, and they carry their enthusiasm for their country into their classes, and they often share their cultures with our students by taking them overseas and teaching classes in an international environment. And those are some of our very most popular classes, and we would be greatly diminished without our international faculty.
We wouldn't be anywhere without them. Since you asked the question, I've been trying to estimate. I've never counted them. I'll bet a low double-digit percentage of the Purdue faculty is foreign-born. Suresh, is that? Yeah. Anyway, and some of our some of our best-known people. Another of our World Food Prize winners.
You have more than one World Food Prize winner that's a graduate of Purdue.
I thought you'd never ask. 3 of the last 10 or 11.
Oh, you've got to be kidding me.
We think it's Nobel Prize of Agriculture, they say.
It's the Nobel Prize of Food.
We think we should just retire the trophy at Purdue. But, but one of them is Dr. Gabiza Jeddah. He's Ethiopian. And his prize came for many, many breakthroughs in sorghum, drought-resistant, weed-resistant, high-yield sorghum. It has literally fed and saved the lives of countless people in his country and nearby countries. Our provost,
he's a celebrity in Ethiopia.
Yes, he is. Our provost, formerly the Dean of Agriculture, never gets tired of telling about coming down here with Gabiza, get in a cab, and the cab driver stops and turns around and says, "You're Dr. Jeddah." He was an Ethiopian. and couldn't drive for the next few minutes because it's like he's driving Michael Jordan, or he's tells the story about how everyone his age at home knows about this magnificent scientist from Purdue University. I mean, so it's an extreme example, but we have so many of these people open doors. They give us the chance to look for those high impact programs that we talk about. Obviously, they are magnets not just for students from those countries, but also occasionally other faculty and indispensable.
How does Fulbright come across each of your radar screens? Do you have either you have Fulbrights or very other kind of government funded scholarships of some kind? AID. So if there are some AID alums here, and I know there are. Many of them say that the things that were most meaningful in their careers were funding AID full-ride scholarships that, and there used to be something like 10 or 12,000 a year. I think it was down to about 1,000. I'm kind of now the world has changed too, and the world's a lot wealthier. Though I still think we still need some of these, and I think we should. We talked about different ways we ought to be supporting certain kinds of programming. But could each of you talk about Fulbrights or any sorts of other kind of scholarships or funding that the U.S. government does that provides, it makes it possible for students to come to your college? And
yes, we are fortunate to be Fulbright recipients, which is fantastic. The students are extraordinary and go back and do great things in their own countries. And I also think that the Fulbright program is one of the most important things that we do in terms of soft power in the U.S., and I would love to see it expanded, not contracted.
Okay. Governor Daniels?
No, same.
Okay, others. Okay. So this gentleman here, this woman here, and this gentleman here. Name, rank, and serial number, and keep it short. We want to make sure we get to everybody.
My name's Tag Demon. I'm at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. I just want to sort of build on a couple of comments. One of the things that really is missing in our government portfolio is building the capacity of higher education institutions that educate the hundreds of thousands of people who end up running countries. And so if you look back at the Point 4 program that Truman initiated, one of the things he did, one of the first things that was done was Oklahoma State University built a university in Ethiopia called Alamayu. And because Alamayu was just starting up, they needed a secondary school in Jima, and there was a kid from Jima who went to that school who ended up at Purdue and won the World Food Prize. Kubisa Ejeda.
Again.
So these, and the impact of people like that is huge. They also, now, there are 50,000 students in Alamayu, and they are the engines of development for Ethiopia. The question is, how can we make sure, how can we help them be as effective as possible? And this is something that we need to do as a country, and we need to do, it needs government support.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks.
I can offer a word of encouragement that I think is responsive. One of the more exciting days on our campus since this school year started was the announcement 10 days, 2 weeks ago. Dan's successors at AID have put together a program. The acronym is LASER, and don't ask me to decode that for you, but it was a highly competitive. There were over 100 applications. Purdue was selected, leading a consortium of a few other schools. But the whole point of this program is to build capacity. Most of it, I think, will wind up being in universities around in the developing world, and we don't know what directions it will take. Clearly, a lot of it will be around science and agriculture and these things. But in other cases, it's thought that there'll be that the participating consortium members will be working to change the educational systems of these countries. Obviously, we're real excited to be in the lead on this, but I'd be excited, I'm just excited to know that AID is working along what I think are exactly the lines you're recommending, and this is the biggest such program of it that they have undertaken.
Could I just jump in for a second? I lived overseas in a number of countries, and I was always concerned that oftentimes the university system in a lot of countries is organized around the lines of socialized medicine. It's great, it's free. It's great as long as it doesn't kill you, and oftentimes it takes 10 years for somebody to get a degree. Could both of you just comment on this issue of sort of so-called free universities? Because I think there's one of the problems, I think, in developing countries is the model that's often exported as a European model where it's quote unquote for free, and then it's underinvested in, and so what happens is you then create and I think there's all sorts of problems with it. So just if you could just react to the concept of free universities. I don't think it's often talked about in these conversations.
So if I could just, I think I'm going to respond a little bit to the side of that,
okay.
but I hope relevantly. We recently engaged with a group called Alumni, which is a consortium of Latin American universities. I believe they have about 17 now, and they're about to add twice that many or more. And what they do is they provide IT support for the college, but probably more importantly, what they are starting to do is to provide online academic partners with colleges like Babson or MIT or University of Barcelona or even Deloitte. Consulting around things like Internet of Things or cybersecurity. We obviously do entrepreneurship, and what it allows these institutions to do who are genuinely resource constrained, right? So they're trying to provide very low cost or no cost education. It allows them to pair with these more premier institutions internationally to have virtually free online or much discounted online teaching materials that should allow them to really deliver an extremely high quality product at a much lower cost to their students. So I think that there are emerging models that will make use of the vast amount of free and publicly accessible online information from really top drawer colleges around the world, okay. To make sure that all of these universities everywhere can have some of the best teachers and teaching incorporated into their curriculums. So I'm optimistic.
Governor Daniels?
Nothing to add? I like that answer.
Okay, this woman here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jennifer LeBron. I'm a doctoral candidate at George Mason University studying international and higher education. I was wondering if you could take a minute to focus inward to your institutions. I'm wondering how you incentivize and reward international work by the faculty in the various parts of your institutions, and if you have any best practices around that.
Okay, and then this gentleman in the blue checked shirt.
Thank you, and I appreciate this shout out to Laser. I'm Brian Bingham. I work at USAID, and that was one of the programs I've been working on.
Thank you.
I'm curious along this sense, because many of us work in the federal government, how can we better help you? Like, there are differences.
Sorry, you're from the government and you're here to help. Is that what you're trying to say? That's great. Thank you so much.
my boss is watching. I have to say stuff like that. That's one of the things that we've encountered has been a barrier, is that the federal government's schedules, incentives are very different from those of universities. And so as we design these programs, as we work with you guys to further these aims, where are the places that we can work better together, and how can we change the way that we do this programming in order to help you be your best selves and achieve these outcomes?
Okay.
Let me just take a quick
can we
shot
just-
at Jennifer's question, which will give you time to think how to answer that question.
Okay. All right.
Well, I don't want to say we will never, but I'm not much interested in incentivizing our faculty to do things that, if their work is of a high enough quality, and it is all the time, to earn a grant or to earn the support of a research or philanthropic or a governmental supporter, terrific. But I mentioned earlier on, we pass a filter over those things we will do institutionally, and I'm glad to incentivize very directly and subsidize international study by our students, for instance, which is one of our strategic priorities. But in terms of institutional involvements, I mentioned that we've tried to be selective and look for those things which will leave some kind of real imprint at a scale that we can take some gratification from later, and something that plays to our strengths and not just move around opportunistically and dabble here and there.
I would just say real quickly, again, back to your point about having international faculty. If you have an international faculty, you're not going to have to incentivize them to do things internationally. They're going to want to do that. They're going to want to share that knowledge, and they're going to be involved by and large. If you are involved in a project that is controversial or difficult, or in a country like Kazakhstan or Saudi Arabia, et cetera, you may need to, if it's a paid project, you're going to have to probably incentivize financially your faculty to participate in those programs initially, and maybe in the long run. And I'm very comfortable sharing revenue with our faculty in order to be able to have the kind of impact on the ground that you're talking about. If I could go to the USAID question, Babson actually doesn't have any government contracts. We don't have any. And we don't pursue them. And I think that it would be interesting for us to understand better how we can engage. How we can, and to learn about, the many projects that are out there. It's just not something that we've gotten involved with because the accounting, because of the, the supervision and so forth is so
That's a
onerous.
very diplomatic term,
That
supervision.
that we can't justify doing it, and so that's our concern.
Yeah. Okay. A couple other folks. Okay. This woman back here, this woman here, and this woman here.
Okay. Oh, okay. I just went up there. Hi. My name is Dina Abdul Hamid. I'm a student through the Les Aspin program at Marquette, actually. And I guess I was just wondering. I think Governor, you said this, that Purdue doesn't really offer that much financial aid towards students in international programs. And I was wondering, do you ever get worried that maybe you're only getting students who can afford such an expensive cost, so they're already predisposed to going more higher-end schools in their own countries and stuff, so you don't really get a variety of that kind of, I guess, socioeconomic people in their own countries? And I was also wondering through BASM that if the faculty, international faculty, kind of helps in creating a more welcoming environment for the students who are obviously in such a cultural kind of shock when they come from more like embroiled countries and stuff like that. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. This woman over here, on the other side.
Thanks. Cynthia Anthony. I'm with American University in Cairo. And we've already mentioned Kazakhstan and Afghanistan. And I just wanted to mention that there are a lot of American universities overseas. And I'm speaking specifically of the ones that are accredited in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. It is a good way for universities to become involved in countries that they might not have any real in-depth knowledge of, because our formats are American and we're easily translatable. Also, we know the country we're in, and so we can be a very good bridge between the one and the other. And we do. American University in Cairo, and I'm sure the other American universities love to collaborate with universities located in the United States. So that's
Great.
That's
Thank
what
you.
I wanted to say.
How old is the American University in Cairo?
It is going to be 100 years old next year.
Unbelievable. Fabulous.
And we're not,
Good.
we're actually not the oldest in the Middle East. The oldest is American University of Beirut, which was founded during the American Civil War. No connection between the two, but
Unbelievable.
it is that old. We've been around a long time.
I think Zalmay Khalilzad, Ambassador Khalilzad, went to the American University in Beirut, and there are many famous.
Yes,
I think he did.
Yes.
Yeah, he did.
All right, this woman here.
Hi, my name is Vittoria Vitucci. So I'm currently an intern at the Educational and Cultural Affairs Bureau, but I'm also
at the State Department.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm also a student at NYU Shanghai, which is the first joint Sino-American university in China. And so as a student there, we're always being told that other universities are watching, and we have guests from other universities who come and observe. So I was wondering what your opinions are on these kinds of universities going forward. Have you thought about them, or has it just not come up in your universities?
So just welcome your reactions to those comments and questions.
I'd like to start by pointing out that all American universities of X are not connected. You know, that they are discrete and they have their own funding models, and I think that people imagine when they hear the term American University of X that the federal government is writing out checks and supporting our influence around the world. It's not true. So, you know, and it should be. So I hope that anyone here who has large checks to write will start writing them to the American University of X, because they are perceived as extensions of the American government and the American people, whether or not we support them. So I hope that we do more of that supporting piece. In terms of needing demographic diversity among our international students, I felt that we really strongly did need that at Babson. And I felt that that was something that had been missing at Babson for a long time. It's unusual for any college or university in the US to offer financial aid to international students. It's just not done. But for us, we think that having that diversity on campus is going to make us a much richer community. And so I've raised now I think about $17 or $18 million toward that program over the last 5 years, because I think it's such a high priority for the college. And so that's really important. In terms of starting, or you're talking about starting joint colleges?
Yes, so this one is
in China? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily in China, but just generally for US and foreign colleges.
So is it with Tsinghua or one of Tsinghua or?
We're with East China Normal University.
Okay. So it's a joint partnership between NYU and East China Normal University.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think the elephant in the room here is that these programs are hard. and that faculties in the US often oppose the establishment of these kinds of programs. And the reason why is simply because of the sorts of concerns that I cited earlier around being able to have academic freedom, being able to teach about human rights or controversial literature, especially in the liberal arts. You're going to find a great deal of controversy when you start talking about planting programs or doing programs jointly with governments that have different approaches to academic freedom or freedom of speech than do we.
I thought that's a great turn of phrase, different approaches to... I think I know what you mean.
I'm hoping for a career in diplomacy before this is over.
You're doing great.
So,
You're showing a lot of promise.
Please recommend me.
A lot of promise.
Me to, while you're writing the checks out, recommend me for ambassador of higher education. Yeah, okay.
Governor Daniels, any comments on some of the points that were made?
Just one more quick word on financial support. Once again, as a public institution, it would not be appropriate. We don't have nearly the money we would like to have for support, particularly of low-income students, and so we want to concentrate it there.
Low-income domestic, U.S. domestic.
Low-income domestic students, specifically students in the state whose taxpayers do support us. But I would just say it hasn't been an issue for us because we've had such strong demand for quite a long time. As I mentioned earlier, we even have decided that we needed to moderate the number and percentage of international students. We had a class. There was a class shortly before I got there that got close to 20% international, and half of them were from one country, that is to say, China. So when 1 of 10 of that class were Chinese, it was just too much of a good thing, and it was a little lopsided. And among other problems, it can lead to it can defeat its own purpose, because when there are so many from any one place, it's too easy for them to self-segregate and stay with each other. Natural, human, comfortable thing to do, but the principal reason we want international students is so that our domestic students can learn from them. And I've told each entering class since I've been there, do not miss this opportunity. You may have a chance, you can learn more about the world before you even get off this campus than you might from the travels that'll be part of your life. And so, like all else, it's a balancing decision, but we believe we've reached a little better balance point.
And I'd like to emphasize that point, that you as a public university are in an entirely different position than we are as a small private college. And I would not have felt comfortable extending financial aid to international students if we hadn't finally been able to offer 100% of demonstrated need financial aid to our domestic students. So this was just sort of like the next step beyond meeting the needs of our current domestic students. Now we can start to look beyond that.
Okay, one or two more. Just my friend here in the blue, and this gentleman here.
Hi, Carla Coppell with Georgetown. I'm wondering, Paul Collier has argued recently that actually the implications of all these international students and professors is a brain drain in developing countries. And so these folks don't return home, they stay here and teach or study, get their green cards. And I'm just wondering what your take is on that, because obviously there's an upside and a downside associated with all of the globalization and internationalization of studies.
Georgetown's a pretty nice place. It's pretty hard to say. Georgetown, DACA, I'm just saying. Let me just get my, I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying at the individual level, it's not a hard decision. But I would love to hear from them about that, but I think that's a really important point. Yeah. This gentleman here.
Robert Simmons, former USAID alumni. You mentioned a couple of quick things on the challenges of trying to break into USAID for contracting. I know USAID is a closed shop. Getting in the new partners is very challenging, to say the least. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of opportunities for faculty from the United States to come into places like Kazakhstan Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan, where I was posted in the stands.
I've heard it's lovely there in April.
Yeah, it is.
Just kidding.
And the thing is that if you're not promoting or discussing democratic ideas,
Yeah.
there's opportunities, economics, marketing, and they need that because I've taught at the undergraduate and graduate level at some of these places. But if your faculty could go over there to some of these places and teach 6 months, 1 month courses, trainings, the students really appreciate it, and you can see how that's helped them over the years. I've seen it how it has helped them over the years in terms of economic reform, not political reform, of course, but economic reform.
Okay. And reactions to this? I think Carla raised a really interesting point.
Our students go back. So I don't buy that argument about brain drain, both in terms of their visas that don't allow them to stay longer than a few months beyond where their graduation. I'm not even seeing companies sponsoring international students to stay anymore. They feel that it's too difficult and onerous on them, so they often either suggest that those high quality students who they would like to hire go work for an international office of the company and try to bring them into the company in that manner, or they just say no. And I would say the bigger problem for me is that I see that US companies won't even talk to international students because they feel that the government's made it too difficult for them to stay and it's a waste of their time. And so I do think that American universities over time are going to be confronting perhaps a declining interest in having foreign students come here because of our immigration policies and especially our work policies after graduation. So I don't think there's a brain drain.
In total numbers, I think we're the most heavily recruited campus in the country, and a lot of these recruiters are actively recruiting international students to go to work in their home country, or at least initially. And so they're facilitating talent moving back. And I guess my other reaction, and I haven't seen the study and might change my mind, but when you consider how the numbers have grown, there's plenty of brains to go around. And I want to keep as many of them here as we can, at least initially. But obviously, whereas we gave illustrations, we're enormously grateful and proud when someone goes back and is able to apply what they learned at Purdue. So, the way to have it both ways is just to keep the flow as big as it can be and be happy whichever place, as long as they learned a lot and are prepared to be great citizens of somewhere when they leave.
All right, I think we're going to end it here. Please join me in thanking our friends. Good.